there's all these things that I just didn't think about like being responsible solely for a place. Not all realtors are created equal. This is just the first time I've done all of this and I didn't know it would be so hard. It's very invasive. That was kind of scary and weird. Measure everything. Hey there, it's Darcy. Welcome back to my channel. And today's video, as you can see by the title, is all about all the mistakes I've made, all the things that I've messed up and learned from in my process of getting my first New York City apartment to myself. If you haven't been following me, I just moved apartments and signed my own lease for the first time and got my own studio, which has been really exciting and wonderful, and I'm loving making this space home. I love it. You know, it's such a great location, a great, you know, apartment, all of that, but there's been a lot of things that have gone wrong that I've had to learn from, and I've lived here about a month now, and I might even make a part 2 of this because I'm sure there's still things I'm gonna learn, but there's a lot of things that have gone on, and I thought I would sit down and talk about all the things I wish I had known before embarking on this journey, things that I haven't really heard people talk about, or common misconceptions that I've found that weren't true in my process. So it's been a lot. Super exciting though, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to make this video because there's obviously lots of things glorifying moving in New York, and some of my videos probably do that a little bit more than others. Definitely check out some of my other videos. I did vlog and you know, talked about some of the issues there, but this is kind of going to be all the things I wish I had known before getting into this journey. So I'm going to try and go in order here, but I might end up jumping around because there's just so many random things that I don't even know how to categorize, but I am going to try and make this a little bit chronological, and some of these are things I think I learned pretty quickly in the process, but that would maybe just be helpful for you to know if you're like interested in doing this. I know there's a lot of people who watch these kind of videos, so if you are interested in moving to New York, or you are new to New York and all of that, hopefully some of these will help you. So the first is just researching neighborhoods. When you're looking for a place, there's just so many places you can live. I've lived in Manhattan, I've lived in Brooklyn, now I'm back in Manhattan. And honestly, just exploring places is super important. And so this isn't so much this time around, but just in general, the first time I moved, like, I think that's kind of one of the best tips I could give, is just looking for a neighborhood that you really like and knowing what you're looking for. So for me this time around, I ended up spending a lot of hours on Street Easy, which is a website that kind of lists all New York apartments, and I spent a lot of time looking at the different neighborhoods and what rent prices were like right now, just because things have been super different with the pandemic. Prices went down in certain areas of Manhattan and were going up where I was living in Williamsburg. It was super weird, so I spent a lot of time looking at what was out there, which I didn't expect how many hours I would spend on that website, but I think it was worth it in the end because I got a feel of like what was out there, where I wanted to live, and I saw this place go up and then it went back. It came, like, the listing went down, and then the second it went back up, I saw it and knew I had liked it, so I got in really quickly to see it. So that's where I think being on top of like the areas that you're interested in, figuring out what's in your budget, all super important things when you're going into this, so when you find the place, you know it's the place kind of deal and can jump on it. So when you do have that place, people, you know, from things I watched, had said like have your paperwork ready, and like things can go really fast. So that's what I was expecting, and one, I should have done a better job probably having our paperwork together. However, I ended up applying for a co-op. If you didn't know, like, I have a whole video about my application process, but I didn't expect it to be as complex as it ended up being, which I just didn't even know there could be even more layers, which I'll talk about in a sec. But that people always say it goes by really fast here, but because of the co-op experience and also just like a lot of things got messed up with the realty company I worked with, it ended up taking like 2.5 weeks to get approved. So I don't think that's a typical experience, but I don't know why, like, that I don't know, there's this narrative about it taking like 2 days to get approved, which I did end up applying for a second place, and that did end up happening for that one, so it definitely can happen. But I just feel like I could kind of go both ways, because logistically there was just so many moving pieces, so many parties involved, that ended up taking way longer than I expected. So every single day it was just so much anxiety of like, is it gonna happen, when is it happening? And I don't know, I haven't really heard anyone talk about that, and maybe that's just like a particularly unique experience, but it definitely can happen. So you can look up articles online. I'm not an expert on this by any means, but typically most apartment applications, you know, need like proof of employment, bank records, tax records. They'll do a credit check. You'll have to fill out an application. Obviously, you'll have an application fee to cover the credit check. For me, because I'm a student, I had to show like student ID and like a class schedule or transcript, and then I had to do some of the more employment stuff for my dad, who was the guarantor, and guarantors have to make like 80 times the rent, I think, versus you have to make like 40 times the rent if you don't have a guarantor. So there's just like a lot of things you have to keep track of. I'll put some like resources in the description that I used, but then because I also applied for a co-op, which is where I ended up living, there was a lot more things that I just didn't know I needed to have on hand, so I had to scramble to get, which was kind of more thorough documentation than I originally had thought. And I also ended up having to get 4 letters of reference. I had to get 3 from kind of like friends and old roommates, and then I ended up getting 1 as well from my previous like previous landlord's what it should be, but I ended up just doing my old roommate because I sublet from him. So I ended up having like 4 letters I had to give them, and I think they actually made a big difference because I think they helped me get the place, but that was a lot because there's other people involved, and then because I also had a guarantor, I kind of had to do double the work, and there was just like a lot of moving pieces. And then I ended up having an interview on top of it for this place because it's a co-op, so that was like a unique experience. But co-ops are actually pretty common, I think, in New York, and I just like haven't really heard people talk about it. I didn't really know anything about it, so I didn't expect for there to be all these additional layers, and also it's a lot more expensive to apply. I ended up dropping like $600, and still waiting for some of that back because some of it was refundable, but it was just a lot more of an application process than I expected. If you want to hear more, definitely check out my first moving vlog where I talked about this, but that is just where I wish I had known what I was getting myself into, because there's just this narrative about like how quick it goes, and it's definitely possible, like if that happens to you, like amazing, but that was not the case for me. It ended up being like a month-long like apartment hunt process, and then like 2 weeks of that, 2.5 weeks of that being part of this like application process. So I just wish I had known what I was getting myself into, and that it was going to be a lot more paperwork than I expected, and just a lot of hassle tracking things down, hounding realtors, and just such a mess. But don't get me wrong, it was definitely worth it in the end. If I had to do it again, I unfortunately would not want to do it again, but it was worth it to get this apartment. So that's where just like kind of go into it knowing it's not all glamorous, like the 30-second TikToks of like, you know, beautiful apartments in New York or whatever, and even my like video showing my apartment. Like there's a lot of work that goes into behind the scenes to get those places, and because in the past I just like did a really like low-key sublet kind of thing, I didn't have that same process. I don't know, he just like didn't make me show a lot of documents, so I just didn't expect it to be quite as intense as it ended up being, and that's just the nature of New York real estate. It's just wild here, and so anytime you're on the lease, that's going to probably be the case, just varying degrees of it. And I think it's even more so if you're buying a place. Like I'm only renting from someone who owns this place, so it is a lot. And if you take one thing from this video, it would be that. And one other thing with all that paperwork and stuff, because they have access to like your bank records, like employment history, like all of that, it's very invasive, which I didn't realize. I felt very uncomfortable like sharing all this, you know, super personal financial information. Like it's just not something I usually talk about with people, like not even close friends. Like I also found out way more financial information about my parents than I ever knew before, because obviously like that's just not something I'm like gonna ask about, and just not part of the conversation. So there's just like a lot of very invasive things. Like some of my neighbors know like my whole like financial history and income and like savings and all of that, just because they were part of like the co-op. Most of the time your neighbors wouldn't actually know that, but like, you know, the realtors and like, you know, whoever owns the apartment building and all of those things are gonna know, which is just so weird because you don't really talk about that, and it's just everyone's in such a different place financially that is so weird. And even just like, yeah, between like my family figuring it out, like just a lot more invasive of a process than I realized. Like I kind of knew, but like going into it, I didn't like think about how weird it would be to have people like looking at my financial records. Like I don't even like to talk about money on my YouTube channel or anything. Like it's just super weird to me. And maybe that's something that's gonna change with time, but that's a different discussion. Like it was just uncomfortable. Like you're just giving out like all this really personal information, including like your social security number, to like these people who are strangers, and you just kind of have to put your faith in them, but you don't really know. So that was kind of scary and weird. And again, it's just the nature of the beast here. But I mean, I think that's true most places, but in New York it's especially true because so many people want to live here, and it can be really competitive and all of that. And they just like, a lot of the laws favor the renters, so the people who own the building, that kind of thing, have to like cover their backs a little bit, and to make sure like that whoever they're renting out to is gonna get, you know, pay the rent and be good for the money and all of that. But it's just very invasive. And then one of the issues, as I sort of alluded to, was the realtor I ended up working with was, I think, pretty new and young on the job, and she just didn't know what was going on. So I quickly learned not all realtors are created equal, and not all realty companies are either. After the fact, I looked at the realty company I worked with bought in New York, and this wasn't my choice, this was who the owner was using. I looked them up on Yelp, and they have like just drastic views on either 1-star or 5-star, so it just really depends on your luck, depends on the person. And I just had a really unlucky experience where I think it's a big company, so a lot of things got overlooked, and we forgot to have my dad sign the lease, so we had to re-sign the whole lease, and that just like shouldn't happen. Like that was just really ridiculous. So just stuff like that happening where that was out of my control, and I just had to deal with it. But definitely not all realtors are created equal, so if you do have it in your power, make sure to pick like a good one. And I don't know how to like tell that necessarily at this point, but I definitely know that it makes a huge difference, because my process was way more stressful because I got someone who didn't know what they were doing, and just overall the company wasn't really doing a good job managing things. And yeah, so that's something I did not think about, and I couldn't have changed it if I had wanted to, but in the future I would like to not work with said company. So just something I learned. And maybe next time I would look up the realty company. Now, like if you really love the space, like you make it work and it's worth it. But I wish I had known going into it to think about that kind of thing. I was just so set on like, if I like this apartment, I'll make it work, and I did. But if I was kind of like, in the next time I do this, I probably would more seriously like look into some of the people behind like the renting process. So throughout the application process, I was just like, I want this to be done. I just want to get through it. Once I have the place, the stress will be gone. Like I'll feel so much better. And while a lot of the stress did dissipate once I got approved, there was still so much stress because moving itself physically is stressful. There's so many things that can go wrong, and you're trusting people with your stuff. It could get broken. Things could not fit. Like my stairwell is really tight. Just stuff like that. There's just so many things, and so that's really stressful. But even once I was physically here, I thought I would feel like completely done with the stress, and I haven't. I think I'm getting there now, but for a couple weeks there, I was still like, I had to buy a lot of furniture. A lot of things have still gone wrong, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but I just like in my mind, and it partly helped me get through of like, oh, once I have it approved, I'll be fine. And it definitely was easier after that point, but there was still a lot of stress that I hadn't considered. I just thought I would be all set, like I'll be not stressed anymore once I was in the space physically and all moved. And like I said, it was definitely better, but there were still a lot of things stressing me out because I didn't have a couch, I didn't have a kitchen table, I only had a mini fridge, and I'm still like trying to upgrade that, and there's been a lot of issues with that. So there's all these things that I just didn't think about like being responsible solely for a place, not having roommates, and just being responsible for like if things go wrong. Like there was a leak when I got here that I noticed when it was raining, so I had to get the super to patch it up, which he's been great. Just like little things like checking the locks on the windows, checking the like smoke detector. I realized the other day that mine doesn't have a battery in it. So just stuff like that other people, like you have to have your own back, that I just like didn't even think to check. Like I just assumed, and they, you know what they say about people who assume, just like I didn't know to check these things. And also One thing I learned the hard way fairly quickly is to measure everything. Number 2 major lesson from this: measure everything. Because luckily I've like found ways to make everything work, but there has been issues, some of which actually haven't worked. What am I saying? So this mirror behind me, it's taller than most of the ceilings in my apartment, which I just didn't think about. I was just obsessed with this mirror, and I took it from my old place. It wasn't mine, but my roommate just like let us take whatever we wanted, and I took this mirror, which I love, and I'm glad I took it, and I found a spot for it, but there's just not really a good spot for it. As you can see, the ladder's kind of in front of it. So just like, I don't know, I just didn't think to measure certain things. And then it turns out my door frame is really small. So my issue with getting a new fridge is, when I signed, I had a lease rider where you can like negotiate and get stuff on top of the normal contract. And so my main con for this place was how small the fridge is. And so I got the owner to say she would reimburse me for getting a full-size fridge. Now, great in theory, but again, this is where there's additional stress I just didn't think about. I've tried to order a fridge twice. I'm on number 3 now. Let's hope and pray that I get number 3. But the first one got randomly canceled. Not my fault, but the second one was my fault, which was the fridge was too wide for my door frame. I have an exceptionally small door frame, which I just didn't think to measure, because I've never done this before, and I don't know why I didn't think about it. And my dad's been helping me and he didn't think about it, but he's not here in New York. So the fridge I ordered came to my street, and they just didn't actually bring it up because they measured the door frame and they're like, yep, this isn't gonna fit. My door frame was just like too small for it. So that was a really stupid mistake that I was very mad about, like mad at myself about. So that kind of thing, where just learning the hard way some of these things. So don't make the same mistake I did, and measure everything. And even like the stairwell and all of that too, because if my stairwell was particular, which my stairwell is small, but I don't think that wasn't the issue here. But there's lots of things that won't fit up tight stairwells, like because I'm still getting my couch delivered. I'm just like, I'm really hoping I'm not gonna get in a situation like the pivot scene in Friends, where like I just like can't get it up and around, but we'll see. So that's where there's just all these other things that I had no idea would be issues, because when I moved into my old apartment, well, all the places I've lived in New York have already been furnished, because I've lived in NYU dorms that were furnished, and then the place I lived before was just like a casual sublet where there was already furniture there. So this is just the first time I've done all of this and I didn't know it would be so hard. And with that old place, free stuff is great, but it does come at a price. So the apartment I was living in before, like, no one had cleaned that place out in a long time, and my roommate who was on the lease left before we did and was like, take whatever you want from what's left, get rid of the rest of it. But there was a lot of stuff to get rid of, so me and my other roommate who left on the first, like, we just had a lot to clean out, and like it was just such a thing to like figure out what we were taking, who was taking what. I ended up taking a lot of stuff, which I'm very thankful for. I got a lot of free stuff that like definitely saved me probably thousands of dollars, but it comes at a price of, it's not really free in terms of you're doing free labor of getting rid of so much stuff, because the place had to be cleared out. So just something to think about, and someone warned me about this, thankfully, so I was kind of prepared, but definitely didn't think about all the added stress of that when you're moving out physically the day of, making sure the whole place is like cleared out as well. It's not just about getting your stuff out, it's also making sure stuff isn't left. And luckily my old roommate was like super helpful as well, so we were in it together. But it was just an additional stress on that day that like I did plan for, but it also was just, you can only do so much, and I wasn't top of mind for me. So yeah, and then just the last thing is, even after the move, obviously like there's all these things, but once all my furniture is here and the whole place is set and all of that, there's still just a lot of responsibility that I didn't anticipate. Like, I had such a sweet gig before, like 2 years, having my roommate be the one on the lease and be responsible for when things went wrong. Things break a lot, especially like this building is really old, so I know there's gonna be things that are gonna happen. Like, I already had that one leak and we fixed it, but it's just been, you know, there's so many things that are come up, and I'm now fully responsible for all of that, and I'm like a pretty mature person for my age, so like I was ready to take that step. But there's just lots of things that can go wrong, like even just having to set up my Wi-Fi, stuff like that, that you just don't think about. Like, all the little things really add up, and I I didn't think about all those little things. I was just excited to get my own apartment, and overall, like, I have zero regrets about this. I'm so glad I did it. This place is starting to feel like home. It's been really fun to decorate, but it's also been a lot to like figure out. So next time I do this, I'll have learned a lot of things. I'm gonna measure the door and the ceiling and to check the smoke detector and just all of these little things. Hopefully I won't move for a really long time, because moving is a lot. Honestly, it's one of the worst things, but you have to do it. And so yeah, I really hope I don't do it again anytime soon. That's the tea, guys. That is my, you know, full disclosure. It's all out there. New York City moving process. It's worth it to live here, but it's just been way more of a thing than I expected mid-April when my roommate told me he was leaving. So here we are, 3 months later. Still don't have a full-size fridge, still don't have a couch, but those things are ordered, so let's hope. A full New York apartment tour is coming soon. I did an empty one, but definitely gonna do, like, you know, once I'm all decorated, gonna do another one. I've already had people asking for that, and that'll be so fun. I'm really loving how things are coming together, and it's just so cozy, and it's all my space, which feels amazing. So it's worth it. There's just a lot of things that I have learned the hard way in a short period of time, so yay for growing up and adulting. Yeah, let me know if you have any other questions or any other moving content. I've done a lot of videos on this now, so this is where we're at. But subscribe if you're not already, and stay tuned for a full apartment tour. Otherwise, yeah, that's it. I'll see you all next time. This is your preview for the moment.